Um, so here we will talk about the application controls. Now, what are application controls? Specific controls you need to ease computerized application such as payroll or order processing. Generalized controls for because they are generalized, there's no specific control. But now we're talking about specific one. Let's suppose we have a control on a order processing. What is that control? That no order you will receive which is which is ordered from a customer which has not provided the um, let's suppose the official email. So that is the condition which you have created. Okay. Or until you verify that customer, you cannot take that order. So again, it is now based on the verification. So again, it is specific, which is considered to order processing. For example, you have a specific control on payroll. When you generate the payroll, you add specific controls, and that control might be to check the attendance, maybe to verify the attendance, to verify the number of hours, or to verify certain allowance, or even deduction. Let's suppose in terms of the income tax, for example, NTN holder or non-NTN holder. So we have specific conditions which we might apply to specific applications, include both automated and manual procedures. So obviously, it can be applied to the automated procedures as well as the manual procedures. For example, if you are entering the data manually, then you can apply that protocol in the manual procedure. Let's suppose you have to enter this information, only then you can proceed to the next step. Or either if it is automated, then you can go for the automation. Ensure that only authorized data are completely and accurately processed by that application. So now let's suppose payroll. So payroll require what? The data which is, let's suppose, the employee data, the employee service information, and obviously the information regarding to their grades. So that data is required for payroll. But let's suppose if you take the ACR data, annual confidential reports of the employees, and you want to use in the payroll, no. That data is confidential data, number one. Number two, that data has nothing to do with the payroll application. Yes, annual confidential records of the employees might be very helpful while we are going through the appraisal process. So in the organization, if you are going through with the appraisal process, then you might use that data. So it means that you have to make sure that only the access of the authorized data is available for a particular application, and not you are make sure that you not give all the data to a specific application. So it includes what? Input controls, what you want to input, what you want to process controls, and of course the output controls. Whatever the output you will generate, normally the output is generated in terms of receipts, in terms of slips, in terms of reports. So these are what? These are called outputs. So you might add certain conditions to it, to the input, to the processing, and as well as to the output, to make sure that only that authorized data is processed, only the authorized data is taken as an input, only the desired data which you want to be there on the report is there on the output. Okay. Now, whenever we are interested to establish a framework for security and control, we need to have a risk assessment, which is a very, very important task. That is what? That is risk assessment. And for all those managers who are futuristic and those managers who calculate everything, they always go for a risk assessment plan or risk assessment strategy. Why? Because whenever we are running any business, whenever we are going through with any or managing any organization, or we want to launch a new product, or we want to add new systems, we always take risk, and good managers always take risk. Okay, but you have to assess the risk as well. Risk does not mean that, okay, without calculating anything you jump from the building and then you say, okay, I have that percent chance to survive. No, it means you have not assessed the risk. So risk assessment means to determine the level of risk to the firm if specific activity or process is not properly controlled. I talked in the previous slides that even if you have planned everything, there is always a chance of failure. The chance of failure is due to various kinds of vulnerabilities which exist within the system. Okay, so it is quite possible that that maybe you have not considered and very some important points while you have establishing, or you are establishing the system room for servers. Okay, in terms of maybe the heat, in terms of the in terms of the accessibility, in terms of, let's suppose, in the shocks. So you have not considered these things, so it there may be the electricity problem. So there may be some sort of electric problem, and that might lead to a fire, and that might destroy the room, and that might destroy the servant. So there is always a risk which is involved. So, but the important thing is that you consider those risks and you make the strategy or to control that risk. So, number one is your job is to determine the type of threat. What type of threat is possible? Number two, probability of occurrence during year. How many times it occurred during year? How much many times it is possible that it may happen during this year? Number three, potential losses or a value of threat. What will be the potential losses if this will happen? What is the value of the threat? And last is expected annual loss. Okay, let's make projection and see, okay, if this will happen, what will be the annual loss? Let's suppose you have started a food restaurant. You have started a food restaurant, and you have taken a very good place, and you have installed a very good machinery, and you have a very good technical staff and chefs and everything, and you have very good facility, and you have started your restaurant in a specific area. And let's suppose all your stoves are, let's suppose, are based on power, electric power, and you do not have any alternative, and let's suppose it is quite possible that due to the electric fluctuations your machines might not work, or due to power failures your machine will not be able to work 24/7. So it means that obviously you will not take the full value out of it, and ultimately it is a loss, and you can calculate that loss over a period of year. And you can also calculate how what is the probability of a power failure over a period of time. How many times there was a power failures or hours of power failure in Jan, how many hour failure maybe in February, in March, and how it will be in summer, where we have that power issues. So you can assess your risk in that manner. You try it, but it is important, number one, to determine the threat. For example, just for the sake of example, here it is given you a table where a risk is being assessed for any particular system, and let's suppose they have assessed that there may be a power failure. What is the chance during the year? There is a 30% chance that there will be a power failure over 1 year. And what will be the loss in average range? The loss which is being calculated is between 5,000 5,000 K to $5,000 to $200,000. Okay, and the other maybe threat is the embezzlement. Let's suppose the people might do some sort of embezzlements and frauds, and obviously that will be a loss for the organization, and they have calculated the probability, and that is 5% chance that there will be embezzlement, and it might lead to a loss of $1,000 to $50,000, and due to some user errors, because let's suppose the users are not well trained, they might do some errors, and based on those errors the loss will be this. So expected annual loss is being calculated, and then you can decide your own self that okay, that is the cost which I have to pay. So what to do? So it means that we have to overcome those problems. Okay, if power failure chance is 30%, so how we can reduce it? Okay, then if we have that much chance, okay, we can switch to, let's suppose, our own power generation system, so that the reliance on the power supply from the private or the government agencies, instead of that you have your own power generation, let's suppose in terms of a generator which is being installed, so that you will be able to have 24/7 power supply to your equipment, so that you can serve the orders in time and you can save money. So similarly, okay, embezzlement, it's 5%, it's less, not that much, so we can just add few controls and conditions so that that embezzlement can be reduced to 1% or less than 1%. Okay, user errors are 98%, which is too much. Although the expected annual loss in that case is only $19,000. But the probability is 98%. So now as a manager, if I see this, okay, how I can reduce it? I can I can have more trainings to my users for my users. I will give more training sessions for my users, so that errors can be reduced. When that these errors can be reduced, that loss will be
I
reduced. That loss will be reduced. So while we go for the assessment of risk, we also go for the mitigation strategy. How we can mitigate it? What are the causes for it? And once we know the causes, then we try to find out how we can remove those causes. Last night, we have observed a power failure, and that power failure is a country-wide power failure. Okay, so that risk has to be assessed, because this can happen, this may happen, and if it will happen, it will affect the whole country, and obviously it will affect the various sectors where power is being used. So we need to mitigate those things. So security policy ranks information risks, identifies acceptable security goals, and identifies mechanisms for achieving these goals. So, what is security policy? Security policy is what? Is a document. and that document is a comprehensive document. And in that document, we also rank the information risk. Risks are always ranked because sometimes we have five different risks. Okay, let's take one example. Okay, that example is, okay, I've just started a restaurant. I've given this example in a good place. So what are the risks? With when I identified the risk, I have certain risk. Okay, what are those risks? For example, number one, let's suppose maybe the power failure. Number two, is, let's suppose, the trained staff, the trained chef. So it's a risk because those people sometimes they work in your organization and they might leave at any time. You cannot stop them, so there is always a risk. Okay. And then for example, as you talked about the risk of, let's suppose, the area in which you have established it. Okay, so sometimes we have problems in that particular area, and that will affect your business as well. So that is a sort of a risk. And the other competitors you have, that might be the problem. Or let's suppose the IT application you have. So the IT application risk, that is there, whether you have that application and how it works. So what you do actually is, you identify various kinds of risk, and then you rate them. That, okay, this is the highest risk, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Why? Because then you can mitigate it. So rank information risk identifies acceptable security goals and identifies mechanisms for achieving these goals. So we do not only identify the various security aspects in the policy, but what we do is we also write the mechanism to resolve it. For example, you have identified that it is quite possible that somebody from inside can steal the information, inside the organization can steal the information. That is your concern. Okay, now uh, how you will manage that concern? So you have come out with a mechanism. Okay, let's suppose you have identified uh, one aspect of the security is that some people within the organization might steal some products from the inventory. Okay, how we can handle this? Okay, we can handle this, let's suppose, by CCTV camera recordings, or implementing some CCTV mechanism within your inventory stores, so that you can have recordings of everything, and all those stocks are visible to you. So this is the way you have mitigated it. Or let's suppose you have devised a policy that whenever the employees leave the inventory stores, they have to be scanned. So again, it is a strategy which you have opted for. Let's suppose how you manage the attendance, you come out with a biometric system, and you have, let's suppose if there is no light and your biometric system will not run, so what you will do then? So obviously you have some backup plan. Okay, if this system will not work, we have an alternative system. So we always go for making such comprehensive policies, so that the organization will work smoothly in a given situation. Why? Because we have assessed everything. If we do not have any kind of assessment, then we cannot do this thing, and then these issues will arise abruptly. And if these situations will arise abruptly, then it will create a chaotic situation in the organization, and then it will hurt the organization, or you can say there will be a big loss for the organizations. So drivers drives other policies. What are those policies? Acceptable use policy, that is called AUP, defines acceptable uses of firm's information resource in computing equipment. So what is the use of information resources and computing equipment? Would you allow them to use this for every purpose? No. So you define that this equipment is only used for this specific purpose. You will not be able to use this for any other purposes, or the information, whatever the information you have, you can only use for the given purpose. That is called the acceptable uses. Unauthorized policies determine differing levels of user access to information assets. So that is called authorization policies. How you will authorize users. So within organization, let's suppose thousands of employees are working. So how you divide those employees into various levels, top level, let's suppose middle level, the lower level, and then you issue them the user IDs and passwords, and you authorize them to access something or whatever they can access within that system. So you what you do is you determine level of users instead of uh, each user or separate users. Normally the levels are determined so that you will give rights to different levels. So if if you consider employees at the lower level, so the less rights will be given to them. If the employees belong to the middle tier, more rights to be given to that level. And obviously when you go for the top tier, so you can give more flexibility to those users at the top level, because they have the command. So for the reason to manage all these systems, you must have a proper policy and audit process where you can see who logged in, for how long he or she logged in, what type of data they have accessed. So as an administrative personnel, the person who is looking after all these policy implementations, actually they manage it, and they have all the records of every. Let's suppose if something goes wrong, they can also determine from their own log files that what happened at that point in time. Identity management, business process and tools to identify valid user of system and control access, which is a very important and basic thing, that whenever you are working in any organization, you have to be identified. Let's suppose number one, when you come into the organization, normally organization now give you a card, your employee number, and nowadays they have your biometric as well, or their your iris identification as well. So whenever you come within the organization, you give your input, and and the organization systems identifies you, and then you can start your work. So identify and authorize different categories of users, specific which portion of system users can access. And obviously once you are identified, then that portion of system which where you are responsible, then you will be provide access to it. So आपको वो access मिल जाती है. Authentication user and protection authenticating users and protect identities. So the system of identity manage, what they do is they authenticate you, and not only authenticates you but protect your identity, will not share your identity details to others. Okay, so that have to be kept secret, and authenticate the user so that user can perform the same task. So the identity management systems include capture access rules for different levels of users, and you can see on this figure as well. These two examples represent two security profiles or data security pattern that might be found in a personal system. Depending on the security profile, a user would have certain restrictions on access to various systems, locations, or data in the organization. Suppose, let's see the profile. Who is the user? If you can see the screen, the user is a clerk, and that clerk works in a personal department. The location of that personal department is in Division 1. Employee identification and codes with profile is given. Data field restriction type of access. All employees data for Division 1. All those employees who work in the Division 1, that employee or clerk has an access to read and make any changes or update. But medical history data, that clerk cannot see it. So even they cannot read or update. Salary data, that clerk cannot see. Personal earnings, how much they earn, the that clerk cannot see. So they have, you can see that in the security profile one, these three, medical history, salary, and personal earning, you can see that there is none. It means they do not have he do not have that access. Only, okay, security profile 2. The who is the user? User is the divisional personnel manager. The location is at Division 1, same division. Employee identification code with profile 27321. Data field restrictions, type of access, all employee data for Division 1, and he has the access of read only. So he can read, divisional personnel manager can read the data and can see the data at any time, but cannot update or change it. So what is, so in that manner, various security profiles, or you can say the security profiles of all users have to be maintained, and normally it is managed. So in that way, a policy, after the policy, these profiles are developed. We just talked about any kind of disasters, or sometimes we call it natural destruction. So for that purpose, whether that disaster is natural or is this disaster is man-made. What is the difference between a natural disaster and a man-made disaster? For example, if a person went into a specific record room and he put fire, so what will happen? The fire alarm will be there, but obviously uh, the fire will be there in the record room. So it is a disaster, but that disaster is what? Is a man-made disaster. But at the same time, there may be the maybe electric fault, a cable fault, and that might lead to a fire in the record room. Now, this is what? This is something which is natural. This is not a man-made. Now, this happened due to, let's suppose, a short circuit. And the first example, a man who actually lit up the room. So that was a man-made. Similarly, let's suppose if we have something like जैसे जैसे हम कहते हैं बाहर हंगामा हो जाता है and people storm into the building and they throw the stones and or they try to destroy things physically. Again, it's a man-made. Okay, but let's suppose there is a flood. So in case of flood, the water came into the building, and let's suppose the water came into the in the rooms, in the control rooms, on the server rooms, and your systems might destroy. So there are various kind of disasters. So whenever you are in a company, in a firm, or in an organization, you need to develop a disaster recovery plan. Normally we call it DRP, disaster recovery plan. Devices plans for restoration of disrupted services. So DRP basically, in DRP actually we list out the all possible situations which might occur at any point in time, and we also have a plan how we will execute about it, how we will restore the services if, let's suppose, this will happen. Let's suppose in a building we caught a fire. So what will happen then? What employees will do? How we will vacate the building? Now this is the plan. That it is called disaster recovery plan. Let's suppose if we have something happened with our devices due to some voltage, my servers went down. So how I will respond to that situation, how I will restore my services. Last night we have a power grid failure. So we have a power grid failure over all the country. So now the authorities must have some sort of disaster recovery plan. Okay, if this will happen, how we will, let's suppose if this will happen again, so how we will respond to the situation. So for that purpose we need to have DRP. For example, I just give you one more example. Let's suppose if we have a very confidential data of our organization, and we kept this in one room, and due to the disaster or earthquake or a bomb blast, might be that building shock, and my servers, let's suppose they are destroyed. So we cannot just say, okay, this will happen now, we do not have the data. No, what we do is we try to manage that data remotely somewhere else. We try to take the backup of that data somewhere else in the other location. So then if this situation will occur, then we will try to restore those services from the other location, where we have that data available, so where we have that backup. So now my clients and my customer quickly restore to my system, and they can use all those services which are related to it. Business continuity planning focus on restoring business operations after disaster. Both types of plan needed to identify from most critical systems. So we need both types of planning, disaster recovering planning as well, and the second is called BCP, business continuity planning. So that the business functions must operate. Let's suppose if something happened with the bank, so okay, once this will happen, how quickly I can restore those bank operations. Now this is called business continuity planning. Business impact analysis to determine impact of an outage. So we always try to find out the impact. What is the impact, so that we should know that how it will impact our organization. So management must determine which system restored first. So if we have in such situation, so we need to know how quickly we can restore, and we'll set the priority. ओके, इफ वी हैव दिस प्रॉब्लम, लेट्स सपोज आज रात को लाइट चली गई, अब पूरे पाकिस्तान की लाइट चलेगी, अब रिस्टोर करनी है। तो अब जब ये रिस्टोर करने जाएंगे तो इन्हें पॉलिसी बनानी पड़ेगी। अच्छा जी, पहले हम कहाँ की ऑन करें, किसकी ज्यादा प्रायोरिटी है, उसको ठीक करें, फिर उसको पहले पहले हम उसको बहाल करते हैं, देन सो एंड सो फोर्थ। इसी तरह से कोई भी बिजनेस एक्टिविटी जब स्टॉप होती है और जब हम दोबारा स्टार्ट करते हैं, सो वी नीड टू नो that we must have the priorities with ourselves, so that we know how we can restore. So obviously it is not possible to restore the whole system at once. So that is again related to business continuity planning. And the first one we talked about, disaster recovery planning. Thank you, and we have almost completed our lecture for today.